Hey guys, tonight we slip straight into a frozen landscape. The kind of place where your eyelashes frost over in seconds, and the wind feels like it's trying to slice your cheeks open with tiny icy knives. You're stepping into the world of the Vikings, not on one of their wild summer raids, but in the quiet, brutal heart of winter. Out here in the fjords, the sea has begun to freeze in places. The snowdrifts pile taller than a man. And daylight barely shows its pale face before vanishing again. You probably wouldn't last a night outside, but the Vikings did, and somehow they managed not just to survive, but to carve entire communities into this frozen backdrop. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're watching this while you're tucked in, go ahead and drop your location and the time in the comments. I love knowing where in the world you're tuning. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The air is sharper than any blade you've ever known. You trudge slowly across a snow-laden path, boots crunching on packed ice. The fjord beside you has taken on the color of steel, with patches of ice floating like shards from a broken mirror. Somewhere in the distance, a raven caws, ominous, maybe, or just annoyed that you're out here disturbing its frozen breakfast routine. The Vikings, your companions tonight, have long learned that these fjords aren't just pretty postcards. They're highways in summer, but in winter, they can trap you like a cave. The wind doesn't stop. It howls across the water and rattles the wood of your shield. Historians still argue whether Viking-age winters were harsher than ours due to what's called the Little Ice Age, which may have started a bit later, or whether the sagas exaggerated the suffering for drama. Either way, standing here with your toes already going numb, it feels pretty convincing that the cold was more enemy than scenery. You pass a cluster of small huts near the fjord's edge, smoke leaking lazily from the thatch roofs. Each breath you exhale rises like a ghost, dissolving quickly into the pale sky. The Vikings depended on this smoke, because where there's smoke, there's fire, and fire meant life. Without it, the nights stretching 18 hours long could claim anyone, even the toughest. One quirky little detail about Viking winters. Some scholars believe they smeared their faces with animal fat or even fish oil to protect against frostbite. Imagine walking around shiny and smelling faintly like a salmon buffet. Effective? Probably. Socially awkward? Definitely. But in this climate, no one cared. You'd be too busy not freezing to death. You stop for a moment, letting the silence press down. The fjord is eerily still. Only the faint creaking of ice and your own heartbeat breaking the quiet. If you listen hard enough, you swear you can hear the slow groan of the water beneath the frozen crust. It's both beautiful and terrifying. The sense that nature here is alive, watching you, and it absolutely does not care whether you make it through Your mind flickers to the Viking ships, sleek and deadly in summer, now pulled up on shore and useless under a blanket of snow. Their hulking shapes in the distance, like beasts asleep, waiting for thaw. You run a hand along the frozen wood, rough under your fingers, and think about how those same vessels once skimmed through waves, carrying warriors to raid or trade. Now, they're just lumber, reminders that winter pauses even the fiercest ambitions. The sky darkens far too early, stars poking through a twilight that feels eternal. And here's the first of many reality checks. You're going to need somewhere warm, fast, or your story ends in a snowdrift. Luckily, just beyond the fjord, the faint glow of a longhouse beckons, a place of smoke, sweat, laughter, and yes, maybe a bit of goat smell. But to reach it, you'll have to keep walking, each step heavy as if the frost itself wants to dress. So you keep moving, crunch, 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 with only your breath, the raven's fading call, and the deep quiet of the fjord for company. Somewhere behind you, the frozen sea cracks with a sound like thunder, and you quicken your pace. Inside those wooden walls ahead lies survival. Outside, the feasting winds down slowly, but no one rushes to bed. Instead, voices rise and fall in the firelight as the true business of the evening begins, storytelling. You nestle deeper into your straw bed, the warmth of ale still glowing in your chest, and let the words carry you. For the Vikings, tales weren't just entertainment. They were lifelines, stitching together long nights with threads of gods, heroes, and ancestors who seemed larger than life. A gray-bearded man takes center stage first, his voice raspy but strong. He begins with Odin, the All-Father, wandering the world disguised in a cloak, trading wisdom for sacrifice. Children stare wide-eyed, clutching blankets. A woman picks up the thread, telling of Thor and his hammer, smashing frost giants who threaten to swallow the sun. The room ripples with laughter when she imitates Thor's booming voice. Her expression exaggerated enough to make even the goats twitch their ears. Historians still argue whether these sagas were passed down with strict accuracy, or whether each storyteller embroidered them with their own flair. Judging by the way tonight's version of Loki seems to involve more pranks than usual, like tricking someone into sitting on a frozen toilet seat, you'd bet creativity was part of the game. Quirky tidbit: archaeologists have found carved wooden storytelling staffs, sometimes decorated with runes or symbols. Some scholars think these were props for skalds, the Viking poets, who would gesture with them as they recited tales. You imagine the gray-bearded man tapping his staff dramatically on the floor, each thud punctuating the stories don't stay on gods alone. Soon, voices shift to local legends. A grandmother's tale of a draugr, an undead spirit said to wander in the snow, glowing eyes haunting the night. The fire pops loudly at that exact moment, and you can't help but glance at the door, half expecting to see frost-rimmed hands clawing at the wood. The children squeal, and even the adults chuckle nervously. Fear, it seems, was always part of the entertainment package. Someone else tells of voyages across seas, of raids in far-off lands where winters were warmer and treasures glittered brighter. You picture the longships waiting under their blanket of snow, frozen now, but once slicing through waves under midnight suns. The stories blur the line between reality and myth. Was that raid truly so glorious, or has time polished it into legend? No one seems to mind. As the night deepens, the rhythm of voices becomes a lullaby of its own. The sagas weave with the crackle of fire, the rustle of straw, the occasional snore. You find yourself drifting in and out, imagining yourself standing beside Thor as he smashes giants. Then, jerking awake when laughter erupts at another Loki joke. The atmosphere is communal, warm, electric with imagination. You realize that storytelling isn't just entertainment here, it's survival. Without it, the endless darkness might crush the spirit. With it, the cold becomes a backdrop, the night a stage where gods and heroes play out their dramas to keep hope alive. Your eyelids grow heavy, but the stories don't stop. They pass from one voice to another like torches, keeping the hall lit with imagination long after the fire's glow has dimmed. You curl deeper into your bedding, letting the words become your dreams. You stir awake, half dreaming of Thor's hammer still echoing in your head. But what truly wakes you is the sound of scraping. The fire has burned low, and now someone crouches near the hearth, feeding it carefully. This isn't about warmth or cooking tonight. It's about safety. You realize that for the Vikings, fire was more than comfort. It was a guard against the supernatural things believed to stalk winter nights. You sit up slowly, wrapping your cloak tighter, and you catch whispers. A mother tells her child to hush and sleep, but the words aren't soothing. They're protective, like a spell. Outside, the wind howls again, and in your half-drowsy state, you imagine it as the breath of a draugr, the undead being from last night's stories. Historians still argue whether draugr tales were metaphorical, meant to warn people against greed and betrayal, or whether they reflect genuine fear of the dead rising in winter's grip. To the Vikings, though, the line between metaphor and reality wasn't so neat. If your neighbor's burial mound glowed faintly at night, maybe it wasn't just phosphorescent moss. Maybe he was up, wandering, jealous of the warmth you still enjoyed. A quirky little protective custom. Some families smeared tar or pig fat along doors and windows to keep spirits out. The logic? If it kept the wind from slipping through cracks, maybe it also confused whatever spectral guest came calling. You picture yourself patting greasy fat into door hinges while muttering a half prayer, half complaint about ghosts who couldn't respect Another sound rises, the low chant of a woman humming in the dark. It isn't a lullaby so much as a protective charm. The tune is simple, repetitive, like a verbal fence keeping danger at bay. The child beside her clutches a small carved amulet, probably Thor's hammer or Freya's symbol. Protection wasn't left to one method. It layered, like clothing. Charms, chants, fire, fat-smeared walls. Survival meant redundancy. Your eyes dart toward the smoke hole in the roof, where faint stars flicker. To the Vikings, the night sky wasn't just beautiful, it was populated. The northern lights, those shimmering curtains of green and red, were often interpreted as the reflections of Valkyrie's armor as they rode across the heavens. Imagine lying there in the longhouse, shivering and believing warrior maidens were streaking overhead, deciding who lived and who died in the next battle. Comforting? Maybe. Terrifying? Definitely. The fire pops suddenly, throwing sparks. A man mutters a prayer to Thor, half joking, half serious. Humor often masked fear here, you realize. When death and spirits might be lurking outside the wall, sometimes the only defense is a wry laugh. Better the goat gets eaten first, someone quips, and though everyone chuckles, you sense the truth behind it. Lying back down, you think about how these beliefs shaped nightly life. Every sound outside, the crack of ice, the cry of an owl, wasn't just nature, it was potential danger. The line between ordinary and supernatural was paper thin in a Viking winter. You can almost feel it yourself, the tingle in your spine, the itch of eyes on your back when you stare too long into the dark. You roll onto your side, pulling the blanket higher, as if cloth alone could block spirits. The whispers fade, the chant softens, but the fire continues to crackle, a fragile fortress against everything beyond. The Vikings survived their nights, not just with. You push open the heavy wooden door, and the world shifts. Outside, the cold bit like wolves. Inside, you're suddenly wrapped in a blanket of heat, though not the clean, radiant kind you might expect from a modern radiator. This warmth is smoky, uneven, thick with the smell of burning pine, wet wool, and a dozen unwashed bodies all sharing the same air. Welcome to the Viking Longhouse, the backbone of survival when winter stretched endlessly across the fjords. Your eyes sting as they adjust to the haze. A longhouse wasn't designed with ventilation in mind. The smoke curls upward from the central hearth, but has nowhere elegant to escape, so it lingers just above head level like a permanent gray ceiling. You duck instinctively, though the Vikings living here barely notice. They've grown used to coughing their way through winters, and historians still argue whether the constant smoke caused long-term health problems or was simply part of their immune systems. The hall stretches long and narrow, beams of wood arching overhead like the ribs of an upturned ship. This resemblance wasn't accidental. Vikings built their houses with the same ingenuity they used for their boats, sturdy enough to withstand storm winds and snow pressing on the roof. Along each side, raised wooden platforms serve as benches by day and beds by night, covered in furs and straw. You'll end up one of those soon enough, pressed shoulder to shoulder with strangers who, thankfully, are too busy trying not to freeze to notice how badly you smell. There's a gentle chaos in here. Children scamper barefoot on the packed earth floor, chasing each other around a low fire that crackles but never flares too high. The smoke has to be managed carefully. Too much fuel, and the house fills like a chimney. Too little, and everyone wakes up with frost clinging to their beards. A couple of goats wander freely among the bleeding occasionally, while a cow in the corner adds a rich barnyard perfume to the air. This was normal. Livestock were brought indoors in winter, both to protect them and to contribute body heat. You might wrinkle your nose, but to a Viking, this was simply another layer of insulation. You rub your hands together, still numb from the outside. Someone passes you a piece of firewood, and you toss it into the flames. The sparks leap upward, lighting up a woman stirring a pot with a long wooden spoon. The smell is hearty. Turnips, maybe dried fish, and a hint of garlic or leek. Not glamorous, but filling. Everyone is waiting for their share, because hunger is as relentless as the cold. Meals are communal, eaten from shared bowls, and if you don't elbow your way close enough, you might be left with thin broth. There's laughter here too, surprisingly loud against the winter's silence. A man with a braided beard strums a lyre, his fingers plucking out a tune that rises and falls like waves. Children join in with clapping, while the older folks nod along. This is survival in its most human form, not just fire and food, but song and companionship to chase away the dark. Quirky fact: archaeologists once found tiny gaming pieces carved from walrus ivory in Viking settlements. Imagine huddling in this smoky room, betting scraps of bread or bragging rights on who could outwit the other while the blizzard howled outside. Entertainment wasn't optional. It was you cough as the smoke shifts in your direction again, eyes watering. The fire's heat feels good, but you notice how uneven it is. Your face burns while your back chills. You shuffle closer to the side bench where others already lie sprawled under layers of wool. A mother hushes her baby with a lullaby that somehow cuts through the noise, a soft rhythm that might carry you towards sleep if you weren't still busy observing every detail. Above, the rafters creak as snow piles heavier on the roof. You imagine the longhouse like a great beast, groaning under the weight, but holding firm. These structures weren't temporary shelters. Some lasted generations, the heart of entire families or clans. They were places of birth, feasting, mourning, and storytelling. Tonight, historians still argue whether every Viking household lived in such communal spaces or if the wealthier families enjoyed smaller, more private quarters. But whether you were a farmer or a chieftain, in winter, survival narrowed down to the same basics: warmth, food, and the shared body heat of those around you. You settle back, inhaling smoke and stew, listening to the rumble of voices echo along the timber walls. It's not glamorous, it's not clean. But in a world where the cold outside could kill you in minutes, this smoky, smelly hall feels like paradise. You're already coughing a little from the smoke, but as your eyes adjust, you notice something else. The fabrics draped around shoulders, piled on benches, hanging from pegs on the wall. Scratchy, rough, but absolutely essential. The Vikings knew that if you didn't trap your body heat under layers, the longhouse alone wouldn't save you. Wool was king, and animal skins were its loyal bodyguards. You pull a coarse wool tunic closer around you. It itches like a badly trained cat, but it keeps the warmth in. Vikings wore wool in nearly every form: under tunics, outer cloaks, leggings, and even socks woven on simple wooden looms. This was their everyday miracle fabric, naturally insulating, surprisingly water-resistant, and durable enough to survive chores like chopping frozen wood or wrangling. Historians still argue whether they treated the wool with lanolin, the natural oil in sheep's wool, to make it even more water repellent, or if that was just a happy accident when sheep weren't washed too thoroughly. Either way, lanolin gave their clothes that faint, sheepy smell, another aroma layered onto the longhouse perfume. Over the wool, heavier hides come into play. Imagine pulling a stiff reindeer skin over your shoulders. The fur turned inward, so the soft side rests against your tunic. Some families kept entire wardrobes of pelts: wolf, bear, fox, even seals when the hunting went well. Nothing went to waste. The pelts not only kept the cold out, but also made quite the fashion statement. Forget your modern down jacket. Try striding out in a full bear pelt and see if any. You tug at a hood trimmed with fur, Covering the head was essential. The Old Norse saying went something like, "You lose heat fastest through your hat, or maybe your head." Okay, maybe they didn't phrase it exactly like that, but they understood it instinctively. Hats of wool or fur kept the body's precious heat from leaking away. Boots, too, were crucial. Viking footwear was made of layered leather and often stuffed with straw for insulation. It sounds like walking around with a scarecrow in your shoes, but it worked. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some archaeologists believe Vikings sometimes used fish skin shoes. Yes, actual stitched fish hides, particularly from large cod or salmon. They were surprisingly waterproof and flexible. Imagine walking into the longhouse at night, peeling off your soggy fish loafers and tossing them by the fire. Fashion Week in Reykjavik, you glance at the children bundled beside the hearth. Even they are wrapped like small woolen burritos, swaddled in multiple tunics and little fur cloaks. Their cheeks glow red from the heat of the flames, their noses run, and their tiny hands fidget with bone toys. They're learning early that layering is life. But wearing these clothes wasn't just about warmth. It was also about survival identity. The outer layers signaled who you were. A finely woven, brightly dyed cloak might mark a wealthier farmer or a minor chieftain. Poorer folk wore plainer, coarser wool, sometimes patched so many times it looked like a quilt of survival rather than a single garment. Dyes like madder for reds or woad for blues weren't just aesthetic choices. They were also little morale boosters during long, colorless. Historians still argue whether all Vikings had access to bright dyes, or if those colors were reserved mainly for the wealthy. Some say the sagas exaggerated the shining cloaks of red and gold, while others point to textile fragments showing surprisingly vivid shades. Either way, when you're trudging through a snowstorm, any splash of color is a rebellion against the white and gray world around you. You pull your cloak tighter, noticing how the heavy wool smells faintly of smoke, sweat, and sheep. It's not unpleasant, not exactly. It just smells alive, like something grown rather than manufactured. You think about your modern hoodie at home, probably spun in a machine with a brand logo printed across the front. Here, your cloak is your brand, your shield against nature, and maybe even your burial shroud one day. Clothing wasn't disposable. It was inherited, repaired, and patched until someone near you sneezes and you notice the wool fibers floating in the air. Everything about this space is textured. The rough wool scratching your neck, the leather boots creaking on the packed earth, the way fur brushes your cheek when someone squeezes past. It's a tactile survival, one where comfort takes a back seat to necessity. You curl up on the side bench, pulling a fur across your shoulders. The heat from your layers mixes with the longhouse warmth. And for the first time tonight, you feel the sting of the cold begin to fade. Scratchy, yes. Smelly, sure. But without these clothes, you'd be frozen stiff outside with the ravens. Layers are the thin line between light. The longer you stay inside the longhouse, the more you notice that warmth isn't just about clothing or fire. It's about bodies, lots of them, crammed together in a wooden rectangle with nowhere else to go. You shift on the bench, pressed between two Vikings who smell faintly of smoke, wet wool, and goat hair, and realize that communal heat was their best secret weapon. The hearth in the center flickers, throwing out waves of uneven warmth. A few steps too far, and your toes feel icy again. too close, and you stretch your legs toward the fire, careful not to trip over the dog curled up at your feet. Dogs were more than companions. They were hot water bottles with teeth. They curled tight against their owners, keeping the chill off in exchange for scraps of stew and the occasional scratch behind the ears. A goat shifts noisily nearby, letting out a snort that echoes through the rafters. Everyone barely reacts. This is normal background music, like the hum of a refrigerator in your modern kitchen. Historians still argue whether Viking longhouses were intentionally designed to maximize this communal heat, or if it was just a happy accident of necessity. Some claim the thick turf walls and low roofs trapped warmth deliberately, while others suggest the layout was more about practicality, room for animals, people, and storage, than clever insulation. Either way, sitting here, sweating in your wool cloak, while goats chew cud 2 feet away, you can't deny it works. A man across from you fans himself dramatically with a wooden plate, grumbling about the heat near the fire. His neighbor smirks and says he should sleep closer to the door if he wants fresh air. Everyone laughs because the door leaks cold like a crack in the world. Whoever ends up near it usually spends the night shivering, wrapped in every scrap of wool they own. Placement in the longhouse was a kind of winter politics. Sit too close to the fire, you roast. Sit too far, you freeze. Sit by the animals, you smell like a barn for weeks. There was no winning, only enduring. One quirky detail: archaeologists discovered that some Vikings stuffed moss and dried dung between cracks in their walls as extra insulation. The communal heat also bred communal habits. You notice people constantly shifting, adjusting their cloaks, leaning against neighbors. Someone snores thunderously, and a child nearby mimics the sound until everyone chuckles. The line between family, friend, and neighbor blurs here. Personal space simply doesn't exist. You share your warmth, your breath, and unfortunately, every cough and sneeze that makes its way around the hall. Illness spread quickly in this closeness, and historians still argue whether the benefits of shared heat outweighed the risks of shared germs. But judging by the sheer necessity, there wasn't really a choice. The fire sputters for a moment, sending sparks upward. Immediately, 2 men rise to toss on fresh wood, because everyone understands the rules. The fire must never die, not even for an hour. Without it, the fragile balance of warmth collapses, and frost creeps. You lean back against the rough wooden wall, feeling the faint thrum of life all around you. Goats shifting, a baby cooing, someone muttering in their sleep. It's a strange symphony, not the silence of icy fjords, but the buzzing hum of survival. You can practically hear the heat radiating off everyone, a shared shield against the cold pressing just beyond the walls. As you start to doze, you realize that warmth here isn't just physical. It's social. You're bound to your neighbors by necessity, sharing not only air and body heat, but stories, songs, and laughter. In the longhouse, warmth is survival, and survival is togetherness. Smoke, sweat, the fire has burned low, and though your cloak keeps most of the chill away, the time has come to think about where you'll actually lie down. You glance toward the benches along the walls, each one lined with straw-filled bedding. Forget your memory foam mattress. Tonight, you're sinking into a Viking bed of lumpy reeds, straw, and maybe a sprinkling of seaweed for good measure. The straw crunches as someone shifts nearby, and you realize these beds are simple but ingenious. Vikings didn't waste resources. They stuffed their mattresses with whatever was plentiful. Straw was common after the autumn harvest. Dried reeds worked in a pinch, and in coastal areas, seaweed, dried and bundled, added extra padding and insulation. Seaweed beds sound odd today, but they resisted pests and held heat surprisingly well. You imagine lying down on one, the salty tang faint in the air, and thinking, this wool blankets and animal hides cover the bedding. You pull one fur across your lap, the pelt still smelling faintly of the forest it came from. Some families stacked hides like layers of lasagna, adding reindeer skins on top of wool to trap as much warmth as possible. Beds weren't private affairs either. Entire families often shared a single sleeping platform, curling up side by side like sardines under the same blanket. Personal space? Not in a Viking longhouse. Survival meant staying pressed close. Historians still argue whether Vikings used wooden bed frames widely or if most people simply slept on raised planks along the wall. Archaeological finds from wealthier households include elaborately carved bed frames, status symbols as much as sleeping places, while poorer folk likely made do with whatever flat surface was available. Either way, what mattered was insulation. Get yourself off the cold earth. Stuff enough straw beneath you and let body heat do the rest. A quirky discovery. Lice combs show up in nearly every Viking excavation. Yes, lice were inevitable when straw mattresses and shared blankets were the norm. Vikings combed through their hair and beards daily, sometimes with beautifully decorated bone combs. You picture someone scratching their head in the middle of the night, sighing and reaching for the comb beside their straw bed. It was less about luxury, more about not itching yourself into madness. You lie down on one of the straw mattresses now, pulling your cloak tighter. It's not soft by modern standards. Hard bits of stalk poke through. The smell of dried grass fills your nose, and you swear you feel something crawl. But compared to the icy ground outside, this is heaven. You sink into the uneven surface, the straw rustling beneath you, and slowly your body heat builds up, creating a pocket of warmth. The sounds of the longhouse lull you towards sleep. The steady crackle of the fire, the occasional snort from a goat, a low hum as someone sings softly in the corner. The rafters creak again as snow shifts on the roof, reminding you that the world outside is still hostile, still waiting to creep in. But here, wrapped in straw and fur, pressed between neighbors and livestock, you have a fighting chance at waking up in the morning. You shift slightly, and the straw crackles loud enough to make a child giggle. The sound is oddly comforting. It means the bed is dry. A wet mattress would be misery in this climate. Vikings replaced the straw regularly, tossing the old bedding outside to compost or feed animals. Imagine changing your sheets by hauling in a new bale of straw every few weeks. Not glamorous, but effective. You close your eyes. The mattress might not feel luxurious, but it's warm, it's dry, and it's yours for the night. The simple crunch beneath you is the sound of survival. Your stomach rumbles, and suddenly the straw beneath you feels less important than what's bubbling in the cauldron over the fire. The longhouse is alive with the smell of food now. Rich, savory, smoky. Vikings didn't exactly enjoy a buffet of fresh produce in winter, but they knew how to stretch what they had, turning salted meat, dried fish, and stored grains into meals hearty enough to get through the coldest nights. You shuffle closer to the hearth, where a woman stirs the pot with a wooden ladle as long as your arm. The stew is thick, bits of dried fish plumping up again, salted pork floating alongside turnips, and maybe a sprinkle of herbs dried months ago. Everyone leans forward, waiting for their turn, because food here isn't just comfort, it's life insurance. Without enough calories, the main rule of Viking winter meals: preserve everything. In autumn, meat was salted or smoked until it could survive months without spoiling. Fish was air-dried into stockfish, so tough you could probably knock out a raider with it before soaking it back into edible form. Grains, like barley and rye, were stored in wooden bins, guarded carefully against dampness and mice. Every spoonful ladled out tonight is the result of months of preparation. Forget takeout. Your delivery is whatever you packed away before the frost. Historians still argue whether Viking diets leaned more heavily on meat or fish, since coastal communities obviously ate differently than inland farmers. Archaeological digs show bones of cattle, sheep, pigs, and plenty of fish, but sagas sometimes emphasize lavish feasts of meat that may have been rare luxuries. Tonight, though, you're getting what most nights offered: a simple stew thickened with barley, filling a quirky tidbit. Vikings sometimes flavored their stews with bits of dried seaweed. Yes, seaweed. Not only was it nutritious, but it also acted like a kind of medieval MSG, adding a salty kick to otherwise bland meals. You imagine chewing through a bite of chewy meat, then a slippery green ribbon of kelp, and trying to pretend it was intentional gourmet fusion cuisine. The pot tilts, and your wooden bowl fills. You cradle it carefully. It's hot enough to sting your hands. But the warmth feels good. The first mouthful nearly burns your tongue, but you don't care. It's smoky, salty, a little sour from the preserved meat, and surprisingly comforting. You dip a chunk of coarse rye bread into the stew, soaking up the liquid until the crust softens. Chewy, dense, and faintly sour from natural fermentation. It's not bakery fresh, but it gets the job done. Around you, the longhouse buzzes with the ritual of eating. Children slurp noisily, broth dribbling down their chins. A man chews slowly, savoring every bite as if it's the best meal of his life. Someone jokes about how thin the stew is compared to last year, and everyone laughs because humor tastes better than hunger. You lick your spoon clean, then glance longingly at the pot. Rations are strict. No one overeats unless it's a festival. The goal is to stretch supplies until spring, when the world offers fresh milk, new greens, and more hunting. For now, it's dried, salted, smoked, stored. Every bite is a reminder of careful, and here's the thing. You feel warmer after eating. The heat from the stew spreads down in your chest, into your stomach, radiating outward. Calories equal warmth. Vikings didn't talk about metabolism in modern terms, but they knew instinctively that a full belly made for a warmer night. As you hand your bowl back, someone starts sharpening a knife near the fire. Tomorrow, more meat might need salting, or dried fish might need soaking. The cycle never ends. Prepare, preserve, consume, repeat. You lean back against the wall, stomach finally satisfied, the taste of smoky stew lingering on your tongue. For now, you're full, and the night feels. The ale buzz still lingers, but when you finally stretch out on your straw bed again, you're struck by something more oppressive than the smell of goats or the scratch of wool. The darkness. Outside, the night has swallowed the fjord whole. In this latitude, winter doesn't just bring cold, it brings nearly endless hours of black sky. You wake in the middle of the night, only to realize it's still night, and it will be for hours yet. Time bends strangely here, without clocks, measured it by firewood piles shrinking, or by the phases of the moon drifting above the smoke hole in the roof. Each log thrown into the hearth is a marker. Another hour survived. You find yourself staring at the fire, tracing the glow as it eats through kindling, until you lose track of whether you've been watching for minutes or. Historians still argue whether Viking settlements at higher latitudes coped with the same near 24-hour darkness we know today, or if sagas exaggerated the endless gloom to heighten the drama. Either way, sitting here in the smoky dim, the debate feels irrelevant. You can't even see your hand clearly in front of your face, except when the fire flares. The darkness presses in like an extra wall. A quirky little trick some Vikings used to fight the gloom. Burning fish oil lamps, hollowed stones, or simple clay bowls held a wick dipped in oil, producing a steady, if faint, light. Imagine the smell. A flickering lamp powered by herring oil, smoky and pungent, filling your nostrils with eau de seafood. Still, better that than stumbling around blind in a longhouse filled with straw, animals, and the occasional misplaced axe. You roll onto your side, staring into the void beyond the firelight. Somewhere outside, a wolf howls. The sound carries across the frozen fjord, low and mournful, until it echoes in your chest. You tug your cloak tighter, suddenly aware of how thin the wooden walls really are. The Vikings lived with this awareness nightly, that predators, spirits, or the plain deadly cold lurked just beyond the timber. The endless night also did odd things to your body. You feel drowsy even though you just slept, or restless when everyone else is snoring. Modern scientists call it circadian rhythm disruption. The Vikings just called it life. You picture someone grumbling as they roll out of their straw bed, poking at the fire because their body refuses to match the endless dark. Inside, whispers rise. People trade quiet words, maybe telling stories or muttering prayers to Odin, Freya, or Thor. Storytelling is more than entertainment. It's how you mark the passage of these impossibly long nights. Without tales, the dark might swallow not just your sight, but your sanity. You glance at the firewood stacked in the corner. It's lower than yesterday. Each piece burned tonight means one less tomorrow. You understand now why every chore, every hunt, gathering of fuel before winter was life or death. Run out of wood, and even the strongest cloak or fattest goat, the door creaks in the wind, letting in a sliver of icy air that brushes your face like a knife. Someone curses softly and shoves a fur against the gap. The fire crackles louder, as if in defiance, but it's just a fragile flame against an ocean of black. You close your eyes, letting the sound of logs popping and the rhythm of breathing around you lull you back toward towards sleep. The darkness doesn't end. It never really does this far north in winter. But the Vikings learned to live inside it, measuring life not by sunrises, but by survival until you blink awake to the same gray haze of smoke and firelight. And for a second, you can't tell if it's morning or still the same night. The truth is, it doesn't matter. In the depths of winter, the days and nights blur together into one long stretch of cold and dimness. That's why the Vikings turned to festivals, bursts of celebration designed to break up the monotony, keep spirits high, and remind everyone that the world still held joy. The most famous winter festival was Yule, and if that word rings a bell, it's because modern Christmas borrowed quite a bit from it. For the Vikings, Yule stretched over 12 nights, filled with feasting, drinking, sacrifices, and fire. You hear the buzz of preparation even now. Someone is dragging in extra logs, someone else is sharpening knives, and already the smell of roasting meat curls upward from the hearth. Tonight isn't just another night of scraping by. You shuffle closer to the activity. Tables are being laid with the best the household can muster. Whole legs of lamb salted months ago. Barrels of ale saved for special occasions. Dried berries mixed into bread for a rare sweet bite. Children giggle as they hang carved ornaments near the rafters. Small tokens shaped like animals or runes. The longhouse feels different, lighter, despite the same walls and smoke. Historians still argue whether Yule was primarily a religious festival dedicated to the gods, or more of a community feast to mark the solstice and the turning of the year. The sagas describe sacrifices to Odin and to the land spirits, but archaeological evidence suggests plenty of practical revelry. Big meals, big fires, and enough ale to make the gods themselves. One quirky Yule custom: burning the Yule log. A massive piece of wood was dragged into the fire and expected to last through the festival. Its embers were thought to bring luck if saved and rekindled the next year. Imagine stumbling over a log the size of a canoe being shoved into the hearth, sparks flying, and everyone cheering as if the fire itself were a guest of honor. As the evening unfolds, you're handed a horn of ale again, this time without rationing. Feasts were the rare times when food and drink flowed freely. Meat you wouldn't normally waste in midwinter gets roasted. Bread bakes, the hall erupts with games. Someone pulls out carved gaming pieces, and soon 2 men are hunched over a board, slamming pieces dramatically as onlookers shout advice. Children chase each other in circles until an elder scolds them, and then laughs anyway. Storytellers rise, reciting sagas of Thor battling giants, or of ancestors who braved harsher winters than this one. You feel your own spirits lifting. The cold outside hasn't gone anywhere, but inside, surrounded by firelight, food, laughter, and ritual, it's almost possible to forget. These festivals weren't just about honoring gods. They were about reminding humans that they were still alive, still capable of joy. Even the Yule feast stretches deep into the night. Someone sets a drumbeat, others clap along, and the longhouse transforms into a blur of rhythm, stories, and drunken cheer. You lean back against the wall, belly full, cheeks warm, and for the first time since winter began, you don't feel oppressed by the dark. you feel part of something larger. A pulse of life, carrying